everybody. Welcome to this episode of Behind the Deal at Upfront Ventures. We're really excited to talk about our latest investment in Daytona. And here we have Yvonne, the CEO and co-founder, with us. Yvonne, share a little bit about, what is Daytona? How did you get to building this company at this point? How did you ultimately think about fundraising? Lots to talk about.
Thanks for having me. Peter and Kevin, thanks for the support in Daytona as well. Really quickly, because the question you asked is super, super long. It's like 15 years long. It's a 15-year long answer. But basically, Daytona is what we call a dev environment manager. The idea is that right now, spinning up a dev environment is like starting a car in the 1900s. Like you have to do all these tedious tasks to get up and running. But now with Daytona, just like starting a car today, it's push to start and you're off to the races. So the idea is that we really feel that it's absurd that you can, press a button and move a car, but you can't, pre-install libraries and get everything set up as you need it to be.
Can you share a little bit about how did you get into, trying to solve this problem in the first place? As you mentioned, it sounds like this is a very long journey. I'd love to hear a little bit about, going way back. How did you get obsessed about this problem?
So way back, 2009 is the year. And my co-founder then and now, Vedran, he's working as a CIO at a bank, and I have a different company, and they're a client of ours. And I come to his office, and he shows me this thing, which is like a white screen, notepad looking FTP connection, sort of browser-based editor. And he's like, look at this thing, I'm tinkering with it. And I'm like, dude, this is like the next thing. Like everything's going to the cloud. Everything's going to be browser-based. This is awesome. He's like, you're an idiot. Like, this is not happening. And it's like, yes, it is. No, it isn't. And we know ourselves well enough that we're sort of like, spitballing there. And he's like, you know what? Here you go. Here's 50% of like whatever this nothing is. Like, go like make this into whatever it is. And so I took that to heart. I still had a different company. And then the afternoons, we were hacking at this thing, which we then called PHP Anywhere. And we did it as a hobby for 2 years. Technology was not there. We couldn't make anything work. We were thinking about doing syntax highlighting in ActionScript, which was part of Flash. So this was, luckily we didn't do that. Web 2.0 came around. We were able to do things in the browser. And we renamed it to Code Anywhere because now it's not just PHP. It's like all the programming languages in the world. And so that's how we started Code Anywhere Incorporated. And we did that for quite a few years, but it was super, super early. No one was talking about, remote development at all. Ultimately, we ended up doing different things. And now, fast forward to about 18 months ago, we restarted the engine to do something similar, not the same, but, similar space called Daytona. After the learnings that we had there and the market sort of like got into the position where we thought it was back then. And that's how we kicked off Daytona.
Maybe take us back, how you ended up working on Daytona from previously doing Shift, doing Code Anywhere also. Would love to just get the broader founder background.
As you mentioned, I founded a developer conference called Shift. It's like a 5,000 in-person developer conference, 6 stages. We close airports and people drive Porsches there. They have cocktails free. It's a super summer party type conference on the Mediterranean coast. And so I started that as a way to give back. The reason I actually started Shift, I started it in 2012 or 13, something like that, because with Code Anywhere at that time, we went to conferences trying to raise money because I didn't know how to meet VCs back then. And I thought they were at conferences, which they were, but none of them invested in us. I wouldn't have invested us at that time as well. But it's like, I met all these people. I met these conferences, they're great. And this is the post 2008, 9, when sort of the economy sort of crashed, especially in that part of the world. Everything was very, very dark. And you go to these conferences and they're super high energy and everyone sort of enjoys going to these conferences. Like, why don't we bring these people to our home city and sort of create this conference? And so I created that conference, which ended up losing money for like 2 years, 3 years, whatever it was. And ended up we have Code Anywhere going sort of okay. Like, why not make it like the Code Anywhere developer conference? And that's what we did for 2 years. And then the conference ended up being more successful than Code Anywhere itself. And then ended up focusing on the conference and growing that business for a couple of years. And so we grew that to about 1,500 people, 3 conferences a year. And then it got acquired by a company called Infobip, which is a competitor of Twilio. Infobip is one of their biggest competitors, and I became the chief developer experience officer in that company. And I was supposed to stay there for 4 years. And so being in that sort of larger company, learned a lot of things, helped them grow that as well. But I actually left a bit earlier to start Daytona because there was such a pull in the market for the solution that we were building. And so it sort of ended up being full circle where, I started this thing with Code Anywhere in 2009, ended up doing a conference which you learn community building around developers, then going to this large company that sells top down, they need a bottom up, learning how it works in the enterprise, and then being sort of pulled back into this whole scenario of managing dev environments.
So you started Code Anywhere relatively in 2009, and then you started Daytona in 2022.
Yeah. In 2023.
2023.
It's 2024. Yeah,
huge shift. I mean, when you started Code Anywhere, Docker didn't exist. Kubernetes certainly didn't exist.
GitHub was barely a thing. GitHub was like a very nascent thing at the time. Yeah.
You have basically lived, not to age you, but the world has changed profoundly in the last 14, 15 years. What did the state of the world look like when you started thinking seriously about Daytona?
It is odd the way that things happen. All these products have been created to make things easier, but it's actually a lot harder now, because when we were creating software back in the day, you spun up an IDE. That's why they're called IDE, Integrated Development Environment, because everything was there. You just spun it up like JetBrains or Visual Studio, whatever you did. You wrote code and you hit run, and it ran, like if the code worked, obviously, right? Today, that is not how the world works. Today, you have so many things that you have to set up for it to actually work. And that's why the IDEs today, yes, JetBrains is one, but the most popular is Visual Studio, which is Visual Studio Code, which is essentially a very bulky text editor. It's not an IDE, because the DE is actually on your machine, or hopefully in Daytona, right? A lot about me. We didn't get a chance to actually introduce y'all in the sense of the firm and maybe background of you two, and then we can get into why you invested in Daytona. So
yeah, of course, happy to go first. We're very much early stage lead investors, investing in you guys, leading your $5 million seed round. That's our bread and butter, and we do that in a very concentrated manner. Each partner here will do 2 new investments a year, maybe 3 if it's a busy year. It's all about sticking with the founders all the way to the end. And you'll see in our portfolio a wide swaths of different industries and company types, etc. I really started off looking at a lot of vertical-specific developer tools and infra, particularly in healthcare and games, given that's what I had studied and worked in, given I've been a gamer all my life. And I've been spending a lot more time on horizontal tooling over the last couple of years. And frankly, a lot of that is thanks to Peter. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I started my career at Venmo. I was an early engineer there. I saw them go from 35,000 active monthly users to 2 million. I just got super lucky to be able to start my career there. But I've done most of my career since as a founder. I started an AI travel assistant company back in 2014. We were basically trying to give every corporate traveler their own personal AI travel agent. We sold that in 2016 to a company called TradeShift. And I love being a founder. I wanted to do it again. So I started another company in 2019 called Macro. It was a workflow automation startup trying to reinvent the company checklist. 3.5 years just trying to find product market fit. And unfortunately, as it often happens, we didn't get it. I love being a founder. It was my favorite job in the world. But I sort of had reached a point in life where I didn't want to be a founder anymore. So I found myself gravitating towards what I saw to be the next best thing, which was to join venture. I was lucky enough to find an opportunity to work with folks up front. So I've been here for a little bit more than a year, focusing mainly on dev tools, infrastructure. I get the privilege to be able to work with folks like you.
You guys are actually a really good case study for certainly what. Not just I think what we look for, but what a sort of lead investor looks for in a company, kind of at this early stage. And we try to break it down in a couple different things. There's what we call founder market fit. That is arguably the most important. At the end of the day, much of a company, especially in these early days, is really about the founding team and why they have such a unique vantage point, a unique obsession with trying to solve this problem that they're going after. I think, as you alluded to, you almost got pulled into Daytona. And I think the environment is very different these days, right? A developer these days, can be working on multiple projects, even within the same company, they'd be contributing to different products, and to spin up and have the right config for a dev environment that works for each of those, let alone dealing with all the third-party integrations and API calls they're making. And you multiply that by, number of developers, number of projects at a single company, you can imagine how that can get very unwieldy very quickly. And frankly, there is a lot of pull and a lot of demand to how do we manage that, at the company side in a seamless manner with centralized governance, with a lot of fine-grained controls, which you guys offer, right? Like you guys allow for whether it's cloud, whether it's, self-hosting, on-prem, like you guys can allow for any and all of those options. And then frankly, too, from the developer's vantage point as well, like I don't want to think about how to maintain my dev environment, making sure that it works, or lobbying a ticket over to the DevOps team or the platform team when something breaks down. Like, I just want to be able to work when I want to work in a fast and efficient manner. And so, like, I think that's frankly what Daytona promises and what we believe is very much needed, and frankly, what we think developers are also ready to adopt. That kind of alludes to kind of the second thing we look for, which is really timing, right? At the end of the day, venture investment in the right thesis, but the wrong timing is also just the wrong investment decision. And we look as much as we can for signals, whether it's from potential customers, from open source, developer adoption, all of these things to try to understand, like, is now the best time to start this company, right? So if you want to boil it down, is now the best time, and why are these guys the best guys, or gals to go after this problem? Those are kind of primarily the two things we look for when we're making an investment this early.
One thing I heard from someone, I don't know, it might be you guys, I don't remember who said it, but it's like, why do you have the right to run it, like to take over this market? Like someone asked me, and it's like, as a founder, like, do you have an answer why you specifically have the right to do this? Which is a very like powerful question, which aligns with what you're saying. So what I heard is, like, as an investor, you're looking for founder product fit, like exactly why can you do that? And someone else, timing's there as well. Is there anything else that you sort of look at Daytona or in general, like to de-risk and say, oh, this is like a good enough, then you go into the deeper due diligence, whatever it may be, when you look at a company to invest in?
One of the things that amazed us about what you guys have done is, you sought out to build an open source product, right? Like you wanted the community to be involved. You wanted this thing to have some semblance of adoption and acceptance from the community, right? And that's, something that it takes real effort. It's not something that you throw out there and things will magically work. And so even though you're an early stage company, early stage product, and maybe a Fortune 500 company will be a long sales cycle and not quite ready to adopt you guys. And that's not something we look for at a seed stage, right? But at the same time, we can see the signals amongst, like, how powerful is this just for an individual developer? And then we go up a level. How powerful is this for a small team? How powerful is this for a large team, right? And you guys were able to show, frankly, a lot of that, traction and adoption, especially for where you guys are at, 18 months into the company. And so, again, what the actual specific traction is differs a bit by company, by what they're tackling, but we do look for a little bit of that as well.
Yeah, Yvonne, maybe we could dive into sort of how you think about who you're building for. You're not the only player in this market. There is sort of rising competition here. How do you think about the market that you're going after, who you're building for, how Daytona differentiates from what else is out there?
Sure. I mean, we really, when we started, we were very much, as Kevin said, it's not we were sort of pulled in, we were very much pulled in. Like I had another job, still had another year and a half, like on stock to vest. And I was actually planning another company in a completely different space. I did not want to do this anymore. I was done with DevTools. I was like done. But then you get like these calls from like analysts, like all the analysts called us up. Like, what are these CDs, browser-based? Like, what are these things? Because we were so long in the market, they want information because people were asking about them. And then you have like acquisition talks with like nothing to show for it. Like not nothing, but it's like very much not what we have today, right? It's like very much like an MVP. You have large companies, like the largest companies, calling you. And so some of them got to a point where it was maybe there was some super interest, some maybe freckled out, but like just having that conversation there was very interesting. And then you have actually companies, like very large companies, who are like saying, oh, we need something like this. Can you build this, right? And so when you have like all these things happening in a very short time frame, we're talking about like 2 months, like all this inbound happening, it's like something is happening in the market. And we're like, okay, maybe we actually try this One point, the reason we ended up kicking off is like the team was tinkering with this new idea, which is Daytona. And we actually got a term sheet to sell the thing, like a full term, like it was there on the table. And it's like, we have to sign this and sell this thing, or we have to say no to this amount of funds. And so it was not insignificant. It wouldn't be an amount that would be in a TechCrunch article, but it's still, a number that you have to sort of calculate. And so when me, Vedran, and Goran being the third co-founder, is like, if you all say no to this, because I was the easiest for me to say yes or no. If you say no to this, like, then we're building this thing, right? And they're like, let's build this thing. And so that was sort of the pull to actually build the company and build this product. And the product and the pull came from large enterprise. It's like, and when we actually looked at the market, we didn't see the market addressing it that well. We saw a couple of players that were addressing segments of the market, but no one was addressing it as a whole. And we found a very big, actual same word, different spelled, like hole in the market, very big opportunity that we can tackle. And so we actually started as an enterprise first product. Even us as engineers in the company is like, you have a handful of customers, but the amount of feedback is very small. It takes a long time. Like for the large enterprise to actually, they try it out and they're spinning it up. And the engineers, by the time the engineer replies to their manager or admin, and that admin sends you a request, and that request gets to the engineer, there's a very slow feedback loop. And so we were discussing how to open source it. And other competitors have open sourced their entire product, which is a very large product that you need a cluster to run. And so my co-founder, Vedran, was very adamant of like saying, this makes no sense to the individual contributor. Like, what can we give to an individual developer to have the same, magical experience, but really small and helps them out? They don't want to have to spin this, whole cluster up. And we were thinking about like licensing, cutoff, the user experience, whatever. It took us 9 months to figure this out. And we made a very sort of clean, what we think a cutoff, like the developer experience is open source in the single little binary that you can execute. And the developer has that same experience. And we launched that March 6th. And like, as we mentioned at the beginning, 2 days later, there was 3,000 stars. And that is sort of where everything kicked off. And we were confident that people would like it, but this was really showed like the market wants this. And internally as the team, everyone now, I don't want to say work harder, but everyone enjoys working more because the entire market is now, you have like PRs and issues and people are downloading it and you have all this feedback and signal in the space that we are not crazy and this is actually something that needs to be done.
I'm going to ask you sort of an interesting question, which is when you think about stewarding an open source project, are there any projects or leaders in the community that you take inspiration from?
There's so many people that we take inspiration from bits, like segments of it. I don't think that there's one that we sort of like copy paste into what we're doing. We were also very recently at a open source founder summit. And it was actually a very big revelation to us because this is our first open source project that we've actually done. Like we've consumed open source, but we've never run open source, which is a very different thing. And it was very interesting that deciding in what to open source, what segment of the product, the whole product, the part of it, whatever, like where that cutoff is, and the license that you use is a very, very complex question. And we found that a lot of founders get into it more altruistically. It's like, oh, this is this cool thing and let's put it out there, not thinking about consequences that happen later on. There's companies that we look at for inspiration of, let's say, how they've created a community, like Supabase, awesome. Like the founder is also an angel in Daytona. Like what they've done with the community launch weeks. Now everyone does launch weeks, but they've been killing it. I think it's just like, it's amazing what they've done. And I love to look at what they're doing, but the way they've open sourced their database is just basically all there. And they have a hosted version that they charge for. GitLab, super business, great the way they made it. It's like open core, the core is there. But we think it's sort of, the community doesn't like that. The community actually hates, I mean, people say, I hate open core. Now, I have no opinion on that, whatever, but like, how do you create a community around that, right? If people don't like that. So there's a lot of things. We think that GitLab did a great job in the way they split what the core is from the product. But we took it a step further where we actually split the core from the proprietary product so that doesn't confuse or doesn't conflict the actual consumers of open source. They only see what's open source and that's all they actually really need in for that persona itself. So
maybe going back to earlier, you were talking about, the founder journey and fundraising and how challenging those things can be. I'd love to hear a little bit about, how you thought through fundraising, getting to this kind of first equity round. What was that process like for you?
Sure. Just going a step back, before we did the seed round, which you guys led, we also did a sort of pre-seed round. And so the way we did that first was super strategic. Because of what we've done historically, we knew that like Daytona is basically a new way of work. And so how do we get information about this new way of work that it is now, this time around, looking at, 15 years ago, not an idiotic thing to do, but it makes sense. I mean, we had inbound like signals, but how do we message that to the larger community? And basically we got a bunch of angels. That was the majority of first round. So founder of Postman, founder of Honeycomb, Supabase, and just a bunch Warp, just a bunch of like great DevTool founders. And so that's how we got the first round together. And I'm sure that helped also when we did the launch of the open source and whatnot, just because of the awareness and the signaling, all of these things. Now, when we were thinking about like the seed round, it was also very much as I've consumed, YC's videos, talked to other founders. We were in Techstars with our old company. Like this time around, it's like you have to structure it. Fundraising is also sales. Like in this sense, you're selling your company.
Yeah.
You're not selling the product, but it's sales. And so when we were thinking about fundraising, I've also read a bunch of how people sort of do these things. And when you're fundraising, it takes a bunch of energy. And so post the pre-seed, we talked to a bunch of people. That's where I met Peter, actually in New York, just randomly. I think I reached out on Twitter. There's other people that after you announce a raise, you always get inbound. And so I locked a sort of 2-3 weeks close to the end of the year, beginning of 2024, and just like met a bunch of investors. Then sort of like shut that down, back to work, grinding. And then sort of set some calls later on. When we decided to launch the open source, which is beginning of March, it went great. Like first person out the gate was Peter. Like IDM is like, you should raise now. Like this, you should raise something. And so he was the first person. Like I wasn't sure we were gonna like work with you in the end, but it ended up you being first, and then you ended up being it. And the whole thing it's actually very short. I believe it took 3 weeks from start to term sheet. So from Peter's message to signing a term sheet, I think it was 3 weeks. And so I think that was actually pretty good on our part.
And you guys ran a really efficient process, and you didn't mention this, but you probably talked to 30 plus investors. Like to your point, it is really a lot of work to go do a fundraise properly. If it weren't for all the prep work you did before, at least getting to know some of the investors first, having some of that initial relationship building, to maybe borrow a phrase from my partner Mark, connecting dots, right, to ultimately form a line. Like you want to run an efficient process like that, you really have to have some seeds already planted to be able to ultimately get to an outcome in an efficient manner.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I see that with the conversations. Any investor that within your first call is when you're raising, I don't know the stats, but I feel that those conversations are much harder to get to a close or close to versus when you've already had the conversation. So It is very much lines, not dots, because when Peter and I talked the first time, like we had a certain amount of revenue. Like the next time there was like almost double the revenue plus like all this traction. So it's like, my assumption is actually I'll let Peter say what his assumption, like what that was.
Well, I think you're exactly right. Like when you build up a relationship with a founder, you're basically doing two things from our perspective. One is you're basically setting the foundations of a relationship that hopefully, gets to expand outwards into us building a company as partners. But the other thing that you're doing is sort of providing some benchmarking for us as far as like what your progress looks like. So when I saw you in, I don't know, was it the summer of 2023? So almost a year ago now. And then, we spoke maybe several months later and had a couple of conversations throughout the year. It was not lost on us that we were seeing a curve. And we were starting to see things starting to work for the company. So seeing that progress, we don't take that for granted. Most company outcomes are pretty flat. And so in large part, we're betting on trajectories. And we could see that just by virtue of having, built a relationship with you and having different touch points throughout the course of that year.
One thing I have to say for a lot of founders, and now as I'm older, more and more ask you is like a lot of people don't nourish those relationships with VCs. I had, people reach out, oh, I'm going to be in the Bay Area. Do you know people like I can meet now because we're raising now? It's like, well, that doesn't make sense. So you do have to do your homework. And I have to say, and some people, I've actually showed this to people. I haven't showed you all, but I do have a Notion sheet before I actually went and did Daytona, which everyone that ever mentioned CDE, cloud development environment, or remote development, I put in there, be it an investor, be it a employee, be it whatever. And I tried to reach out to as much people as I can just to talk, what's your opinion on this? And that does take time. But when you do that, then you actually know you're talking to someone that makes sense. So
maybe last question from me. What were you looking for in an investor? You've clearly worked with others before. You've worked with angels as well. Like you said, you've raised capital before. Like, what were you looking for this time around?
When you're looking for someone to work with long-term, it's very, 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 very important that you work with someone that has actually done this before, on one hand. So like, in a sense, like Upfront as a fund is a quote unquote serious fund. Like you all have done this before and how companies evolve and what are founder issues and what actually makes sense. You have a lot younger, I think they're called emerging funds. Some of them might have experience, some have not. And when they don't have experience, like alignment of expectations is quite different. So that is one of the things. There's also one thing called like too much signaling, in the sense of like, you want to have a fund as well that is a good signal to you. So it's like, do the people know what they're doing? Have they done it multiple times? Does the fund signal that as well? Can the fund connect us or help us in the manner that we need? And I have to say this, and I'm going to say this in public, by the way, just Kevin. So when I did my research on you and did the reference calls.
Yes.
So one of the people said, you're going to be on the Midas list. Like that, like this guy's going to be on Midas. That was
very generous of them.
But I'm just saying. So I'm saying that is out there. And another thing that other people said also as well, for you, because we haven't mentioned this, but Kevin is on the board of Daytona now, which means Kevin can has voting rights and all those things. It's like, how is he like a person to work with? But everyone said that you are the partner, the board member, which is like no bullshit. I won't mess with you. Very lean going, very salute driven. And he's the person, the way they said it is, Kevin is the person that, if you need help, you can call him at midnight. He'll answer the phone, do that. But when you don't need him, you don't feel like you have a board member there. And so outside of that and the Midas list thing, it seemed like, okay, these people check all the boxes, right?
You're very kind, and we certainly hope that we can actually live up to those things that you mentioned. It hasn't been that long, but to Peter's point, like we've actually gotten to know each other over the last 9 months, and now that we're working much more closely together, it's been a phenomenal start, and we're very excited to support you guys all the way through the entirety of the Daytona journey. Maybe to end a bit on Daytona, how can people find out about you? Are you guys hiring? How do individuals find out about you? How do enterprises find out about you?
Absolutely. So bunch of ways to find out about Daytona, website, Daytona.io. But I also always point everyone, the GitHub repository is everything. From there, you can get to, our Slack channel, which have more and more people coming in. The events, we put up some events for DevTool people. If you want to just join and hang, we don't sell anything, just like come and meet. Depending on when someone's watching this, it'll change, but definitely there's a careers page looking for people to help us along the journey. But basically very transparent, becoming a full open source company, which we want. So everything's on GitHub, out in the open. So you can see the code, the issues, the tickets, the jobs, the links, the Slack, everything is on github.com/Daytona.io.
Awesome, Yvonne. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Upfront Behind the Deal. Peter and I are thrilled that you picked us to be your partner, and we hope to live up to all the things you said.
Great to have you on board, and looking forward to progressing in the same trajectory that we've been, or a bigger trajectory than we've been.
Yes.
Before it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome.